Hello you sex beasts and welcome back to War Thunder. This is the Bf 19 K-4 and most of you are probably guessing, hold on, didn't you already do a video on this just 5 days ago? And yes, that is true, I already did a video on the K-4 whilst it was stock and before patch 1.65. In fact, this aircraft has received somewhat of a change. I would say buff, although this is my personal opinion, but the K-4 now has the ability to swap the nose-mounted 30mm cannon with a 20mm MG151. Now before we head on to the main part of the video, I actually want to give a shout out to Fly, or well, not really a shout out, but a thank you. Fly Daily actually shouted out the channel in his last whole row video, which was unexpected and I appreciate it. So you guys probably know him, to be honest. I mean, he's one of the biggest channels on War Thunder. But if you haven't yet, go check him out. I'll leave a link to his video in the description down below. Now in the last video I was pretty vocal about my disliking for the stock K-4 with its 30mm MK108. And let's be honest, it's a pretty terrible experience, especially since you can be up here to face Griffin Spits, which now in patch 1.65 have been massively upgraded, by the way. They get 150 octane fuel and have 2400 horsepower. Yeah, Griffin Spits are kind of overpowered right now. But in short, the aircraft suffers from a quite terrible stock grind, really, that makes it just too heavy. It suffers from bad compression, which makes it very hard to use in BNZ, and the 30mm cannon just either misses your target completely or harmlessly sparks off it. And carrying little ammo, you can also not just hold out the entire match. Now, with the release of patch 1.65, thankfully, the K-4 now has the option to install a 20mm in the nose instead. Sadly, it is a modification you have to research, keep that in mind, but at least it's a tier 1 modification, so you can right away unlock it right from the get-go. Now, since my last video, I've also spent a couple of hours in enduring confrontation, spading this aircraft and getting it fully aced. It's time to load up the stat testing tool and do some science. Now for this test we're only going to consider the climb rate and the acceleration. The K-4 was never really intended to be a turn fighter anyways, and I have to refine my testing method for that anyways. Now the climb rate test underwent a little change since the last blueprints video. As many of you guys have pointed out in the comments, it's better to climb by indicated airspeed rather than by angle. And don't worry, I'm going to do a full video confirming that at a later date. But for now, we're going to take the Kiwi's handy document on ideal climbing speeds for all aircraft into consideration here. You can find a link to the document and Kiwi's YouTube channel down in the description. Do leave him some encouraging words. This kind of work takes weeks if not months to make. But back on track. First, I wanted to see if carrying either the 30mm Maschinenkanone 108 or the 20mm Maschinengewehr 151 actually makes a difference to the performance. And after climbing to 5 km altitude at a constant 290 km indicated airspeed with web enabled, and then accelerating to 500 km per hour indicated airspeed in level flight at that altitude, the results are exactly the same. No, like really, there's less than a 1% difference between the two loadouts. Now, the MG151 was in real life a full 15 kilograms lighter than the MK108, although the aircraft also carries considerably more ammo in the form of 200 rounds instead of the 108-65. So either the net weight ends up being exactly the same, or Gaijin simply didn't model the weight difference. Alright, on to more important topics. Given how bad this thing performed when stock, I was really interested to compare it to an aced K-4. So again, I did the testing and these are the results. The stock K-4 climbed at an average rate of 20.3 meters per second between 1 and 5 kilometers altitude. In the same environment, the aced K-4 climbed at an average of 25.6 meters per second. That's over a 20% difference in climbing performance, which in part explains the stock grind. Now, whilst I didn't do the top speed test myself this time around, according to the stat card, the difference between the stock and the aced K-4 is about 53 km per hour, or in statistical terms about 7.4%. Nothing too substantial really. And then I discovered the culprit. The reason the stock K-4 is so damn awful. You guessed it, It's the acceleration. As you can see on the table, even starting out at 350 km/h, there's already a 30% difference between the models, which just gets worse the faster you go. To the point that I couldn't even reach 500 km/h in the stock aircraft. The end average is a massive 40% difference in acceleration across the board. And since acceleration is what gives you the ability to gain energy quickly, this directly affects your energy retention as well. Or, well, better, lack thereof, unless you're extremely careful. So there you go. There's the numbers to back up my hate for the stock K4. But what about the Ace K4? Well, I'm glad to announce that I actually love it. No, really, I even managed to go 10-0 in one enduring confrontation match. It's just really enjoyable to fly. That being said, there's still some problems that aren't necessarily the aircraft's fault, but rather the game's meta. So first off, the aircraft climbs very well. On shorter maps you might still find yourself below certain P-47s with air spawns, or even some Spitfires. But generally, when you keep that to 90 km/h indicated airspeed up, you're going pretty damn high, pretty damn fast. Once up there, the acceleration is actually pretty decent and the aircraft gains speed pretty well. In fact, it's one of the fastest aircraft at its tier now. Even at low altitudes you can sometimes outrun the opposition, especially since you hold onto any speed gained in the dive for a very long time. This thing has great energy retention. The problems start with the overall maneuverability. Now there's a speed sweet spot for turning where this thing can actually turn pretty well. It's somewhere between 400 to 500 km/h. But sadly that's really the sweet spot, because below that the aircraft just turns very sluggish and very heavy and just doesn't respond to turning at all. And above that, at about 600 km/h, you start to suffer very heavily from compression. One of the reasons I really disliked the stock K4 with its MK108 was the MK108 just requires extremely precise aim, which is just really hard to pull off in this aircraft. Even Ace, you're going to have trouble getting your nose up if you're going past 600 km/h. Now the 20mm is somewhat more useful. Well, not more useful, but more easy to use, easier to use at least, as it has a higher muzzle velocity and more ammo, which means you can lead less and spam more, but it also does less damage. Now keep in mind the 30 still very aggravatingly sparks a lot. In fact, most of the time it seems like the shells just spark instead of actually doing damage to the enemy aircraft. And this is also going to be a factor with the 20s, but since you have a higher rate of fire, to generally compensate it somewhat. Now, you're going to get less one-burst kills with the 20, given, but overall I still recommend using the 20 unless you have the gun pods. We're going to touch on that a little bit later on. Now, the problems with this aircraft really start with how the game is played. This type of aircraft, this high-altitude NG fighter, high-altitude B&Z aircrafts, requires a good team. The B-409s excel in picking off single targets focused on another teammate, since all the enemy really has to do to evade you is to, well, just evade you. If you're diving on something and they evade you, it's going to be very hard to take them down. This is not really the kind of aircraft you can really carry a match with, all by yourself. Especially not with the 30mm cannon, you just don't have enough ammo for it, so you're going to be constantly reloading. And if you're caught at low altitudes and you have a Spitfire above you, you're essentially dead meat. Yes, you are fast, but a Spitfire diving on you is still going to catch you on level flight. And once that happens, there's not much you can do. You just don't really have the maneuverability to shake them off. Now, the aircraft itself does seem to be decently resistant to damage, I do have to give it that. Although, given that this is a... Okay, this is something that I noticed in the comment, by the way. Yes, it's technically an inverted V engine, but it's simpler to just differentiate between radial and inline. So for all effects and purposes, I'm going to call this engine an inline engine. Inline engines, differently from the radial engines, as found, for example, on the P-47, require additional cooling. Radial engines are simply cooled by the air. Inline engines require water cooling, which is one more system that can fail in your aircraft. And since the water tanks for the water cooling are mounted on the wings, just right on the wing roots, any kind of damage can very easily puncture those tanks and evaporate your water. And once your water is gone, your engine is going to overheat very quickly. Any kind of damage to your cooling system in general is pretty much a ticking time bomb. If you don't land your aircraft very soon, you're going to kill your engine. Now notice that I didn't really mention the 13mm machine guns all this time. I've been pretty much just focusing on the cannons. That's because the 13s are kind of useless, really. Especially the default belt does absolutely no damage, or very minimal damage, except for the occasional fire, but those also seem to be rather rare. With the upgraded belt, of course, you do have some better options there. I myself use the stealth belt with the API shells, which seems to be the best belt for this type of gun. But even so, you only have 2 of the guns, you don't have much ammo for them, and you're not really going to carry any matches with them. And that's where the gun pods come in. Now the Kurfürst does have the ability to carry 2 20mm cannons under the wings, which carry a total of 200 rounds on top of your already existing cannon ammo. These are really awesome for shooting down just about anything. Now, of course, there is a performance hit with the cannon pods, and we've discussed this in the previous video, but really against same or low tier aircraft, it's not really a factor. And of course, if you are up tiered, you are better off not carrying the gun pods, since every bit of performance can help you, and especially since gun pods do tend to affect the acceleration of your aircraft quite heavily. Something we've discovered in this video that you can see in the info card right now, or find the link to in the description down below. Self-promotion. But yeah, overall the gun pods are just a really nice thing to have. They give you just more firepower and more confidence in your shots as well. Keep in mind that most of your opposition is going to have at least 2, if not 4 20mm cannons, so getting any kind of firepower that you can is always going to be a benefit. Now, rounding back to the topic I've touched on before, with the game meta not really being adapted to this kind of aircraft, the high altitude energy fighter requires your enemy to also climb, so that you actually have targets. There's no use in you being at 7 km altitude if all your enemies are at 2 km altitude. You cannot even see them. And that's in fact what happens. If all your enemies decide to stay low, all you're going to do is just fly around burning fuel and not really doing anything. Now, if they do stay low, it requires all of them to stay low. Oftentimes I've found myself getting just fed up with waiting at high altitudes and diving after low targets trying to get them. They simply evading me of course still having the energy to get away, but not quite as much energy as before, and then just one of their teammates, the last guy, the only guy who actually took his time to climb, being above me and wrecking me. As such, the Kurfürst is kind of an aircraft that has a lot of requirements in order to work, but the problem is it just has very little reward to show for it. I mean, sure, you can very easily stay alive if you play it correctly and have absolutely awesome KDs. As I said before, I had a match where I had 10 kills to 0 deaths. This aircraft has the performance in the right hands to be untouchable. The problem is, all you're going to do is shooting down 1, 2, maybe 3 aircraft in a match. But if your team isn't there, then you're going to lose the match, which is going to massively decrease your RP and silver line gain. And in general, it's just a very ineffective way to grind in this game. It's just the fact that the War Thunder meta rewards aircraft that excel at low to medium fights. That's where all the AI are. That's where you can quickly find an enemy and where you can quickly rack up the kills. The high altitude energy fighter, like the Kurfürst, spends most of the time climbing, then searching for enemies, then failing a couple of attack rounds if they're aware, and then climbing again. And it just drags on and on without you getting very little silver lines or RP to show for the amount of time you spend in the game. I mean, there's a reason it's much faster to grind the British and the Russian tech tree than it is the German or the American one. They just get way more RP for the same amount of time. In order to truly balance out an aircraft like the Kurfürst, not just in performance but also in rewards, the game would need some kind of system that rewards this playstyle. Be it extra points for diving on an enemy, or heck, even AI air targets like more spotting aircraft or AI bomber formations at high altitude. Essentially what we need is ground targets, but in the air. And that's why I just love Enduring Confrontation, why Enduring Confrontation is just absolutely fantastic for German aircraft. You've got AI targets, you've got large maps, you've got respawning enemies that are going to be below you, and you've got more people playing bombers or attackers that you can feast on. Even in a stock K-4 like I had, EC is by far the best mode to play. The problem with that is, RB EC is an event, and it's very rarely available. And until we have something that rewards high altitude NG fighters for performing their role, these aircrafts, although being just absolutely excellent when aced and performing very well, it just will never be quite as worth your time as a Spitfire. No matter how good you are, or how fun it is to play. And that's my finishing thoughts on the Bayerische Flugzeugwerke 109 Kurfürst 4. Mit 20mm. Ja. I've gotten to really like this aircraft since I aced it. I might have been a little bit too harsh on it when it was stock, but it just is that bad when stock. But yeah, even though it's a great aircraft, you just don't really get much reward for it. But hey, if you don't mind that, if you don't mind grinding and you just will like flying for the fun of it, then hey, give it a try. And you know what? Tell me in the comment section down below if you learned anything new, and well, now you can actually tell me how good you find this thing yourself. And if you have any other maybe ideas for how to get more RP out of this kind of aircraft. Now with patch 1.65 released, it's going to be a tough week since there's so much content to cover in very little time. Thankfully I have most of the Japanese tech tree now unlocked, so I'm probably going to do some videos on the more interesting vehicles like the autoloader, like the recoilless rifle thingy, Majigi tank, and some others. I'm also going to see if I can do some reviews on the new premium vehicles to let you guys know if they are worth any of their money. And yeah, lots of new content. So give this video a like to really show your support for the channel. Subscribe if you're new around here and join the sexy beast. At this rate, we're really going to break 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year. The growth in the past couple of days has been just absolutely incredible, and I really thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. And I really welcome all of you new sexy beasts to the channel who've been joining the channel really like crazy over the past couple of days. I think you're going to have fun here. But that's it for today. As always guys, my name has been MikeGoesBoom, and thank you very much for watching.
You can lift your head up to the sky, take a deeper breath and give it time. You can walk the path among the lines with your shattered frame of mind, or instead you could always stay